This concert, the fifth in our 2007-2008 season, brings together three of the most precociously gifted composers of all time. The first work is the Symphony No. 1, or Classical Symphony, by Sergei Prokofiev. Prokofiev was born in the Ukraine in 1891, and his first compositions come from the time when he was about 5 years old. He wrote something called an Indian Gallop, and it was actually written down by his mother at the time. And this, we would say, technically is written in the Lydian mode. It's in F major, but with B naturals instead of B flats. That's simply because Prokofiev at that time didn't like to play on the black keys on the piano, so he only played the white notes. That was when he was 5 years old. By the time he was 7, he was playing chess, and when he was 9 years old, he was even writing his first opera, The Giant. Eventually, Prokofiev found his way to the conservatory in St. Petersburg, where he studied composition, piano, and conducting. The fact that he was several years younger than some of his colleagues there marked him out a little bit from the crowd, and some of them thought he was rather odd or even arrogant. In 1909, he graduated with less than impressive marks as a composer, but when he eventually left the conservatory in 1914 from his piano class, he actually left with the prize of a grand piano for getting the highest marks of the year. His first symphony, which Prokofiev called his Classical Symphony, was begun in 1916. He completed it in 1917, and the first performance took place in April 1918 with the composer conducting. Very interestingly, it was just a couple of months later that Prokofiev actually left Russia to come to the USA. Essentially, the Classical Symphony follows the model set for a symphony in the classical period, and according to Prokofiev himself, it was written in a style that Haydn would recognize and would have used had he been alive at the time. There are 4 movements, and Prokofiev limits himself to the size of the classical orchestra, and over the decades it's become one of his most popular works. Now, although Prokofiev lived in the West for many years, he found it impossible to settle there. He returned to Russia in 1934, and it's rather ironic that he died on the same day as Joseph Stalin in 1953. We move next to the French composer Camille Saint-Saëns, who was also an incredibly gifted child. It's occurred to me as well that both Prokofiev and Saint-Saëns are both very well regarded for music they wrote for children. With Prokofiev, it was Peter and the Wolf, and with Saint-Saëns, of course, it was Carnival of the Animals. Saint-Saëns' career spanned several musical epochs. At the beginning, Chopin and Mendelssohn were still in their prime, and Saint-Saëns was at the forefront of all musical development. However, by the end, when jazz and Debussy were coming to the fore, he was regarded very much as an ultra-conservative. The Cello Concerto in A minor was written when Saint-Saëns was 37 years old. It's unusual in that it's in one movement, but it's an unbroken movement. There are 3 distinct sections, and although more celebrated cello concertos have been written since that time, notably by Dvorak and Elgar, it's very telling, I think, that many composers, in particular Shostakovich and Rachmaninoff, thought that the Concerto in A minor by Saint-Saëns was the greatest of all cello concertos. Like so much of Saint-Saëns' music, it's beautifully written technically and combines virtuosity with both a raw energy and at other times the most singing melodic line. Unusually, there's no lengthy introduction from the orchestra, just a single chord, and I particularly like the description by the great cellist Pablo Casals, who said that the opening should be like a flash of lightning. Now, as you know, here at the Reading Symphony Orchestra, we like to bring you some of the most gifted soloists in the world. Many of you will remember, of course, the fantastic violinist who was here recently, Nick Kendall. And I'm delighted to tell you that the soloist for the Saint-Saëns Cello Concerto will be the assistant principal cellist of the Philadelphia Orchestra, who just happens to be Yumi Kendall, Nick Kendall's sister. I'm sure that's going to be a fantastic occasion. Of course, the most famously gifted and precocious of our triumvirate of composers for this concert was Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart. And Mozart was born into a musical family, and understandably there was an expectation that he'd go into the family business. At an incredibly early age, we understand that he was writing music, at the sort of age where most of us were just learning how to balance on two legs. And not long after this, he was traveling around Europe, playing the violin and the keyboard for some of the most important noblemen and monarchs of the time. Sadly though, despite his huge renown and this early success, we need to remember that Mozart died at the incredibly early age of only 35. He was penniless and he was buried in a pauper's grave. He left us a vast number of compositions. I think there was something like 600. Many of them are real masterpieces, and they range from operas, symphonies, concertos, string quartets, sonatas, and lots of other popular miniatures besides. The work we're going to hear in this concert is the Symphony No. 40 in G minor. Now this certainly has one of the most recognizable snippets of classical music as its opening. It was written in 1788, 3 years before Mozart died, and interestingly, from the 40 or so symphonies that Mozart wrote, only 2 of them were in a minor key. That's this one, number 40, and also the Symphony No. 25, which is also in G minor. It was written during a remarkably productive period for Mozart, a period of just a few weeks when he wrote the 3 symphonies, number 39 in E flat, number 40 in G minor, and number 41, symphony known as the Jupiter Symphony. Like the Prokofiev Symphony in the first half of the concert, it has 4 movements, much in the classical style of the 18th century. The third movement is an almost angry minuet, something that would have been very hard to dance to. And the first movement is unusual in that it doesn't either begin with a grand or pompous introduction like so many symphonies did, or with a very dramatic melody, but it opens with a gentle accompaniment figure before we hear that most famous of melodies in the violin. So please join me, Andrew Constantine, and the Reading Symphony Orchestra at the Sovereign Performing Arts Centre on Saturday the 15th of March at 8 p.m. for music by Prokofiev, Saint-Saëns and Mozart.